Harding.
Welcome to The Next Step TV Santa Barbara. This is Glenn Maurer, and I'm here today to discuss a very topical subject having to do with my professional background as a former lawyer and the California and national political scene that we're all involved with right now. The result of the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who died and created an interesting dilemma in our political world. Most people say we're now at a 4-4 division in the Supreme Court. The Republicans refuse to allow Obama to appoint. Obama is going to nominate somebody anyway, and we're going to be facing another example of the type of gridlock that has happened in American politics for the past at least 8 years, 7 years. And here today to discuss it with me and offer our thoughts about what this mess is all about is Hap Ziegler. Hap is an attorney, and but mostly a consultant and a longtime observer of these, what's the word I want to say, these almost humorous debacles that the country faces so often recently. Welcome, Hap. What do you got to say about this one?
I think that you're right. It's very interesting. I think the paeans that went out in praise of Mr. Scalia versus the more realistic review of his work were very interesting. And I was surprised by some of the information that I received. But we're here today to talk about...
In praise of the justice.
Well, some were in praise and some were not, and actually more were probably not.
But let's move on to what's going to face us, because I mean, you and I know what the court was like with him on board. We now have a court that is divided by most reports. I don't agree with the people who say it's 4-4 currently. I think it's maybe 2 or 3 moderates, maybe 4 moderates, and then 1 or 2 really conservatives. And then maybe 1 or 2 really liberal people. So I think we have a centrist court, but that's not how the world sees it. But in any event, whoever gets the nomination now, be it by President Obama's choice or by whoever gets selected in January, takes office in January, that will potentially change the balance of the court. So what do you think? You know, is this a serious moment in American history when we see the change for a decade or 2 or 3 in the course of the court?
I think that Scalia's seat is not a major shift regardless of who's appointed. If it's a conservative, obviously it doesn't change because Scalia was quite conservative. In most areas. And if it's an Obama appointment, and my guess is a Hillary appointment, we're not going to see another William O. Douglas. So it's probably going to be a very moderate, leaning right kind of appointment. So I think that 1 seat doesn't make any difference. What's interesting is if we have something that happens, like happened under Ronald Reagan, where he made 5 appointments, or even under Richard Nixon, where he made 4, and of course Franklin D. Roosevelt made 9. If something like that happens in the next administration, which it easily could, in the next 8 years, we could have 4 or 5 appointments.
Okay, well,
and if that happens, I think that could be a sea change if we have somebody who will actually lead to a more moderate left-leaning. Some of the comments that I've read say that the court's left-leaning in the last several decades, which is ridiculous.
Well, it is ridiculous.
It's been pulling the center farther right for the last 30 years.
I think that's the nature of American politics, though. When we have a two-party type of system, we allow one group, one party, if you will, to pull to their direction or to the other direction, thereby changing the definition of the center.
Correct.
And so what objectively might be a centrist position becomes right now, I mean, they call Obama being, they talk about Obama being a liberal or progressive or leftist president, but I don't think by any political science judgment over the last 100 years, nobody would say his policies are really that far left of center. They're certainly not progressively left of center. They're barely left of center. So, but we have a pretty interesting system in America with this separation of powers in which the court has so much authority over us and the presidents get to appoint it. I was interested in going back for 100 years. In the last 100 years, all the presidents we've had in the last 100 years, almost an exactly even number of Democratic appointments and Republican appointments in that period of time. So it seems to have balanced out over the decades in terms of the politics of it.
I would agree with that.
You would?
I would not.
Would not. Go ahead.
I agree with your numbers. In fact, I think we talked about it, I think it was about 45 or 44.
One or two on the Republican side, I believe.
I think that was who appointed them.
Right.
I think if you look at their opinions and judge them on a conservative to a progressive scale, that the appointments have been far more conservative leaning. You could use the word moderate because they're not totally conservative. I mean, one of the most notable ones that were a flashback or a snapback, I guess I should say, was Warren's. I'm forgetting his first.
Warren Harding?
No.
Oh, Earl Warren.
Earl Warren, thought to be a staunch right-wing Republican leader of the Republican Party in California, and brought in a real wave of liberal rulings.
Right.
And of course Frankfurter on the other side, nominated by and then approved by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, turned out to be one of the most conservative on the court.
So I heard Senator Cruz addressing this issue as part of his campaign. And one of the points he's making, which is interesting, sort of along the lines, the opposite of what you're just saying in a way, he's saying that the Republicans have been constantly outfoxed and outsmarted by the Democrats who appoint people to the bench that will pursue liberal agendas, whereas Republicans appointed people to the bench promising to pursue conservative agendas, but then they get tricked or the people do not pursue those agendas. My view of that is that, well, once they're on the court and have independent jurisdiction, they can actually do what they know to be true and right under the law, and then people like Cruz see it as liberal or progressive when it's really not. It's not something that the Founding Fathers would have been surprised by. But that argument that he's making, that the Republicans are trying to find the true believer on their side of the agenda, but they fail, whereas the Democrats allegedly find something closer to what they want, which is part of the fear the Republicans have right now of letting Obama name their successor.
Understood. And I guess the position for the Republican side in their either stopping the actual nomination process or voting down, rejecting the nominee, the reason to stall that for the next administration is they have no chance of picking anybody while Obama's president. And they're rolling the dice on whether they can beat Hillary or Bernie if he's nominated.
And how the Senate will stack up. You know,
Right.
the public has to remember that just having a Republican winner in the White House wouldn't necessarily mean that Republican winner would have any more power to appoint a successor to Scalia than Obama has right now if the Senate changes.
Oh, no, it'll be laughed at least by people that are intelligent, in that if Hillary, let's say Hillary becomes the president and she makes a nomination, where will all the Republicans be that said, let the next administration pick the Supreme Court justice? That'll be the vote of the people.
Yeah.
And of course, they'll have 1,000 reasons why that shouldn't happen.
Right.
So, it's going to create real turmoil. One of the things you had asked me earlier is, what do people think about the Supreme Court, and do they pay much attention?
Right.
And I would just comment on the pay much attention. I think that most people don't pay much attention at all.
I think that's important to say. They only pay attention to it when it's brought to their front of their nose by the politicians who are trying to make it an issue. And even then, I think it's a little vague for the general public to understand the importance of having this person selected to sit on this court. We have a chart, if we can get that up in a moment when you get a chance back there, which shows the general public's attitude about approval and disapproval of the Supreme Court over the last 15 or 20 years. And mostly they go along sort of half approving and half disapproving to the degree that they even think about it. There have been periods of time in American history when the war in court, for example, was a phrase that Nixon and his friends, there's the chart, approve in the dark green line and disapprove in the light green line, and it's about equally balanced, and sometimes a little better, and sometimes a little a little less approval, but sort of seems like it bounces along pretty evenly.
Yeah, I mean, generally they approve of the Supreme Court.
But they don't approve of decisions. So when Citizens United comes down, for example, which might be that 2010 or whatever, there's these changes where something will bring it to their attention. Then they know that there is an issue about who sits on the court.
Right. One of the ways that, obviously not a statistically bona fide way of looking at this, is the amount of emails that I get from people who lean to the right. And there's almost no discussion about the Supreme Court.
Even now?
Even now. And unless somebody like Cruz brings it up, or Hillary brings it up, or Bernie brings it up, and even after they do bring it up, there's not much discussion afterwards. I go to cocktail parties, dinners, people will talk politics. Almost nobody talks about the Supreme Court.
I think it's partly,
or any judge, any selection of judges.
partly because it's arcane. It's something they don't quite, how do you know how to judge a judge? One of the bizarre events.
Just had that this morning, just had that discussion this morning.
That conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, and we know it every year coming in California, the appellate courts and the superior courts are on the ballot, and citizens get to vote to approve or disapprove of a nominee, or even select a nominee. And I don't know, I mean, I get a half a dozen or 10 calls and they say, do you have a recommendation for any of these appointments? And I have to admit, even as a longtime lawyer, I have very little knowledge about most of these people who are running for these positions. I don't know what the justice in Northern District of California was like, who's on the bench. I don't know what these folks are like.
Yep.
On the other hand, I like the fact that we do get a chance to participate in their election, because if one of them rises up as particularly evil or bad in behavior, we do have the opportunity to remove them. But yes, so I'm not surprised that when your friends are not bringing the subject of the judicial appointment up, is because I think they probably feel they don't know what to say about it.
Right, which is, do they pay much attention? Kind of answering that question that you
Right.
posed earlier before we
Right.
got on the air. And I think they don't.
Right.
And they don't pay attention, I think partly because they think it doesn't affect them that much, which is totally
quite.
incorrect.
It is
And then part of it because it is an arcane structure, and what does it mean, and how is it going to affect me?
Well,
People usually remember things like the Miranda cases
Right.
and the Miranda warning, and 95% of our population says it doesn't bother me, I'm not a criminal and never will be, so what do I care?
no, Roe v. Wade, remember that. I mean, I
They
think
do
I think
remember
I
Roe
think
v. Wade,
I think the
yes.
American public has certain landmark moments when they understand the importance of the Supreme Court in changing laws. I get a lot of these political lobbying efforts where they want me to sign a petition and send it off to the courts saying, don't do X, Y, or Z. I never sign those positions.
Well,
because that's
I don't
not,
think they read them.
well, but that's not the point. The point of a court is that it's not, you're not voting on it. You know, they're supposedly independently analyzing the law and facts and coming out to a constitutional result. And what the public thinks you know, as angry as I was about Citizens United, I don't think that the Supreme Court justice, any one of them, should be listening to my vote on what they should do on Citizens United Revisited if that comes up again. But I do think that we should care about who gets the appointment. So in the time we have left, let's talk about the dynamics, the political dynamics of this. The Supreme Court is down one. We're at 4-4 court. A lot of cases are before them right now that are very important. Generally speaking, if that court divides 4-4, which people suspect that might do on these cases, the decisions will then be left as they were in the lower courts, and people should understand that. The court, if the court can't write an opinion, the lower court opinion that they took up then stays in effect. Is that correct?
That's one of the alternatives. A less often alternative is they can relist it to be heard in the next session of the court.
When they might have a successor.
Yes, so that would still be in limbo at that point.
That would be a vote on the court. Does the Chief Justice get to control that?
I don't know the intricacies of that one.
I want to ask you a question that I never, I don't know. In California, they sometimes bring up appellate court justices to serve on the Supreme Court when there's an opening or a vacancy.
Right.
Does that ever happen in the federal Supreme Court? Do we know anything about that?
I think either Learned Hand or Brandeis was brought up at one point. One of those two was brought up to sit, and I'm thinking it was Learned Hand because he never made it to the Supreme Court.
That's right.
I think he was brought up to sit, and I don't remember the circumstances.
Is it by consensus the other justices?
Perhaps. I just don't remember.
Well, that's not going to happen here, of course.
No.
So now we have a situation where the Constitution says that the President shall appoint, and the Congress shall advise, with the advice and consent of the Senate, a Supreme Court justice. So is there any reason why the President would not or could not or should not do this? If, for example, the other side of the coin, the President said, I will not appoint to fill any vacancies for the next 3 years until we have a party, until my party has a chance to retake the Senate. Would that be an appropriate behavior on the part of a President?
Well, that's an interesting question. It really is. I think reading, Scalia would read the Constitution and say, yes, he can do that. Doesn't say he has to do it at any certain time. I would think that it would be some kind of a mandamus action, mandamus meaning an action to force somebody in the government to do what they're supposed to do. I don't know if that's what it would be called at that level.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what they could do about it, but I think we ought to think about this from both sides. People act like it's unreasonable for President Obama to nominate, or appoint actually, a Supreme Court justice.
Nominate, yes.
Well, I think it's actually to appoint, and then they have to confirm.
Well, it's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, and they always want to talk about a nomination. I think it's an appointment, and if they don't like it, they can not approve it. That's the consent.
Right,
That's the
right.
advise and consent. But anyway, it would be unreasonable for him, I think unconstitutional perhaps, for him not to make the effort to appoint somebody to that position, and then it would be unconstitutional, or at least, even though politically viable, probably abstractly unconstitutional for them not to consider it in the Senate. That's my view of it.
Well, that's one of the issues today
Right.
on Scalia's seat is that who's the, I'm losing names here. Who's the guy that's from Kentucky that's head of the Senate?
Oh, yeah. Now you got me blanking out.
Anyway, that's
Republican leader of the Senate
Right, he
with
is
MC.
talking about not bringing it up for
Yeah.
consideration,
No,
which to me, I think that's a misstep.
but I
Because,
don't, so could anybody force a step around, like you mentioned a mandamus or some attempt to go to a court and compel that the committee hold hearings? I don't see any of this happening. It's just too
No, I don't
basic
think-
to the constitutional separation of powers. But still, I think, so now we're back to not whether it's legal not to hold hearings, or it's legal not to make an appointment, or it's legal not to refuse an appointment, but what the politics of it are. So we have this really interesting dynamic where the President of the United States, in support of his candidate for upcoming vacancy that he's about to have, will make the appointment that he thinks is the most politically compelling. Is that true, do you think, or do you think he will?
well, I'm not sure I'd say politically compelling. let's take it at face value that he will appoint the person most qualified to sit at the highest court of the land, which in theory is not necessarily a political appointment.
Well, yeah, but you and I know that there are thousands of qualified, not most qualified, thousands of very well qualified.
Well, I've already sent in saying I can't take it, and I assume you've done so too.
Well, yes, I mean, I'm too old. I don't want to go on that board, on that bench, it's a lot of work. But yes, but I think the point being that we know that there are a good many justices in the nation and academics and others who could fill a Supreme Court position adequately or more, or better adequately. So it becomes a political decision.
Yes, I hear what you're saying.
Well, look at the first two nominations that have been leaked by the Obama White House.
Well, I saw a list actually of about 8.
Oh, I haven't seen that list.
What's the 2?
Well, the first one I saw was the governor of Nevada, a male Hispanic from a Republican that he floats out there and tests whether or not the Republicans will block a Hispanic Republican nominee to the Supreme Court. He was tempted for a while, it appears, but then he got the word that he's not supposed to really be participating, so he withdrew his name. Now it's a woman from the Midwest, was the last name I saw, Kelly, a woman named Kelly, whose qualifications are apparently hugely approved by Grassley, the chair of the committee that does this, when she was nominated 3 years ago, and he praised her effusively. So again, we have, I think, clear politics going on, where they're going to try to push the other side to look bad. And the other side is going to say, we can't trust Obama to appoint anybody because anybody he appoints is going to be, what, a socialist like Bernie Sanders.
Well, they can look at his 2 appointments, and neither of his 2 appointments are very radical, progressive. They may be slightly blue, but not so as you'd
When I mentioned earlier that I thought the court was divided, a center core of moderates and a couple on the outside, the way I had it broken out was on the liberal side, you have Ginsburg and maybe Sotomayor.
I wouldn't even put Sotomayor there, but that's okay.
But maybe.
You could be wrong.
And maybe Stevens. But on the other side, we've got Kagan is certainly in the center lane, and Breyer and Kennedy are, I think, in the center lane.
Yeah.
And then you got.
Well, Kennedy leans a little more right, but he's
voted more with the other side than anyway. Point being, this simplistic idea that it's 4 on one side and 4 on the other side isn't true. So whomever Obama nominated could be a kind of person that fit much more in the center, and would go one way on one kind of case and another on another kind of a case. And the Supreme, and I think the Senate should take the time to consider that. The other choice they have is to say no, they won't consider anybody, which they're saying.
That's what they're saying they're going to do.
And then take their chances that they won't have a chance to say. We wouldn't have the chance to force a moderate appointment, quote unquote moderate appointment.
Yeah, well, I think they will. I think
they will have hearings.
I think that come a year from now, 6 months from now, like it have to be a year from now, whoever's nominated, Republicans will say exactly the same thing they're saying today.
Well, unless there's a Republican in the White House.
Well, of course.
It's a possibility.
Anything's possible.
Not in your mind.
Possible. One could be hopeful.
There's a possibility to be a Republican in the White House. There's also a possibility to be a Donald Trump in the White House, and whatever you want to call his politics.
Oh, I see. We're not calling him a Republican.
I wouldn't call him a Republican. I don't see him as a Republican.
A lot of the Republicans are calling.
He's not a Republican, but he might get elected on their party. Anyway, the point being, this whole messy situation we have here, so we come to this idea. The court can lumber along with the divided, with an even number of justices, which lends the possibility to divide a court, because then would you break the tie.
If we could stop right there, the thing that scares me the most, scares me in the sense of what I would like to see happen at the court, is that Obama, in his typical way of trying to get consensus and agreement, will nominate somebody who is a little too pink for me, and where I'd like to see the court go. They talked, there's an Indian Native American out of Arizona that has been appointed to Arizona courts and federal courts, all by Republicans. We know Republicans don't reach out to try and moderate.
No, it's
And
like
and
the-
even if Republicans do, they don't in Arizona. And so-
Republicans appointed Sarah Clarence Thomas. He wasn't there by accident.
That's right. That's right. So what I see, the scariest thing for me is that the Republicans will force Obama. He won't call it a force, but he'll want to make the appointment so desperately that he'll pick somebody that's not good on the court. You know,
Well,
another.
When you said pink,
Frankfurter.
did you mean in the sense of being left?
No, I'm sorry. Pink meaning starting to look like red, in the blue-red range. I'm sorry.
so
That was
Too
confusing.
conservative, too centrist,
yes.
conservative. Well, I think he's done that already. As I said before, I don't think his appointments so far have represented the great progressive legal mind thinking of Warren or you mentioned, the
Frankfurter.
Frankfurter or others that we've known over the decades who are actually intellectually left and understood these things from an intellectual level.
I'm sorry, not Frankfurter then, I meant flipped when they got appointed, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, okay. But anyway, the point being, I don't think it's going to, I think what's going to happen is that he will appoint somebody, and it's possible that that appointment will be so attractive along the lines of what you're saying. It'll be so center-right, I mean, that it'll be tempting to the Republicans to grab it, because if they don't grab it, there is the chance in the fall they will lose that election and they'll have even less bargaining power. So I think it's quite possible that that's what we're headed for. But until that happens, we're going to be in an interesting hiatus. I wouldn't be surprised if the court doesn't reform itself, though, in the current eight justice numbers. I could see a 5-3 division on some of these cases.
I can too.
If that happens, it's going to take a lot of the impetus away from making any decision about appointing a successor.
True.
But I think the summary we would agree with from our political view, I'm assuming, not to speak solely for you, is that almost anybody they appoint is going to be a better choice than Antonin Scalia.
Agreed. I think he was, not a very technical term, but I think he was a complete jerk. I think,
Well, yeah.
I think he abused his station in society by the
Yes,
way
he
he
did.
talked. I think he abused his position on the court. I'm not saying the man was not intelligent in an IQ way, but he was certainly not a choice.
He was
for me.
actually result-oriented justice who refused to follow legal precedents, claimed a phony belief in original intent, and then ignored it when it became inconvenient.
Yes, exactly.
When he made the decision on the Florida election call, and then later on said when people complained about it, just get over it. He told me where he was coming from. Well, we're running out of time, so thank you, Juanita. Thank you, Ali. Thank you to the station for letting us come back into your home again and sort of clumsily peruse over some of these difficult issues about how one goes about appointing members of the third part of our divided government, and maybe pointing out why it's so obscure and hard to understand. Thank you, Hap, for your thoughts.
My pleasure.